what if the most powerful biohack for your nervous system isn't, a freezing cold plunge or like a really complex fasting protocol?
Right, or some wildly expensive supplement you have to order online.
Exactly. What if it's actually that forced, kind of slightly awkward tradition we usually rush through once a year around a dry turkey?
Oh yeah, the classic Thanksgiving table moment.
We have all been there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the fourth Thursday in November. You're sitting around this crowded table. The air is heavy with the smell of roasted food. And usually the lingering tension of a political debate someone started like 5 minutes ago.
Always, there's always that one uncle.
Right. And then someone clinks their glass and demands everyone go around and say one thing they're thankful for.
Which immediately induces a mild panic.
Total panic. You scramble for an answer that sounds good, but, isn't too vulnerable. So you mumble something about family and good health. The tension breaks, and then you completely forget about it for another year.
Because it's polite. It's a nice social thing to do.
It is polite, but treating those fleeting moments of reflection as just a social pleasantry is, frankly, a massive squandered opportunity
Yeah.
because we are sitting on a literal biological upgrade.
We really are. We brush past this profound mechanism for transformation simply because it's wrapped in a holiday trope, you know?
Yeah.
But from a physiological standpoint, like from the perspective of how the human nervous system actually operates, gratitude is not just some greeting card sentiment. It is a hardwired, completely measurable biological state.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is.
Yeah.
And we relegate it to manners, completely missing the underlying architecture of what that specific cognitive state does to our physical bodies.
Which brings us to the entire mission of today's deep dive. We are taking the science-backed insights from Gary Brecka's exploration of human potential, and we are breaking them down to the studs.
Because you need to understand the mechanics. If you really want to understand the efficiency and the depth of how your brain handles stress, or how you connect with other human beings, you have to look under the hood.
Right. So today, for everyone listening, we are going to explore the actual neurochemistry of appreciation. We're going to analyze massive clinical reviews on mental health, and finally, give you a highly specific, science-backed toolkit to literally rewire your nervous system.
And I think the distinction between a social pleasantry and a biological state is, well, that's where we have to start.
Okay, let's unpack that. What's the actual difference?
So a social pleasantry is semantic. It's an external performance, right? When someone holds the door open for you at the coffee shop and you say thank you, you're just participating in a social contract.
You're just being a polite human in society.
Exactly. You're verbalizing a phrase you are conditioned to use, which happens primarily in the language centers of the brain. It keeps society running smoothly, sure, but it doesn't fundamentally alter your physiology.
Got it.
A biological state, on the other hand, is a systemic shift in the body's internal functioning. Specifically, we're talking about the autonomic nervous system and the limbic system.
Okay, I think this is where the wires get crossed for most of us, because we've conflated the polite habit with the internal state.
We absolutely have.
It's like treating gratitude as just a polite habit is like using a massive state-of-the-art supercomputer just to check the time.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Like, the hardware has a capacity to run complex simulations, process massive amounts of data, and we are just using it to display 4 digits on a screen.
Yeah, you're vastly underutilizing the hardware.
We have this incredible machine in our skulls, and we're just using it to say thanks for passing the gravy, while entirely bypassing the operating system's potential to regulate our biology.
And that biological regulation is so powerful because when you move past that semantic thank you and actually enter a state of gratitude, you are actively signaling the hypothalamus.
It's the hypothalamus. Okay, remind us what that does.
Right, so the hypothalamus is basically the command center for your autonomic nervous system. Typically, under the chronic stress of modern life, your hypothalamus is constantly triggering what's called the HPA axis.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Exactly. It sends a signal to your pituitary gland, which then sends a signal to your adrenal glands, which then pump cortisol and adrenaline directly into your bloodstream.
Which is great if you're running from a bear, but not great if you're just, reading an email.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But that is your biological default when you're sitting in traffic or dealing with a difficult coworker.
Mm-hmm.
But genuine gratitude acts as an inhibitory signal to that exact pathway.
Wait, it physically stops it?
It physically halts the cascade of stress hormones. It's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling. It is the biochemical downregulation of the systems that cause you to feel overwhelmed.
Wow. Which is basically the ultimate antidote to the environment we live in, considering we are marinated in stress hormones from the moment we wake up.
Oh, totally. We're swimming in cortisol.
So to understand how this biological state actively lowers those hormones and changes our perception, we have to look at the specific brain chemistry.
Yes, let's look at the neurochemicals.
Because when you consciously focus on appreciation, you're activating parts of the brain that regulate dopamine and serotonin. And, we hear those terms thrown around constantly as the quote-unquote happy chemicals.
Right, the pop psychology buzzwords.
Yeah, exactly. But they actually have very specific mechanical functions when it comes to calm, focus, and resilience, don't they?
They really do. So to visualize this, consider the mesolimbic pathway, which is one of the primary dopaminergic pathways in the brain.
Okay.
Dopamine is fundamentally misunderstood by most people. It's often labeled as the pleasure chemical, like it's just about feeling good. But neuroscientists understand it more as the molecule of motivation, reward prediction, and reinforcement.
So it's about driving behavior, not just feeling happy.
Exactly. When you consciously search for and identify something you appreciate, you are stimulating the ventral tegmental area, which projects dopamine into the nucleus accumbens.
Okay, that sounds very technical. What does that actually mean for the person experiencing it?
It means you are giving your brain a chemical reward for identifying a positive stimulus. Dopamine is basically saying to your brain, hey, this is valuable information for our survival, pay attention to this, and let's do it again.
Oh, I see. So it builds a loop, and then serotonin comes in. Because if dopamine is the accelerator for reward, serotonin feels like the stabilizer.
Yes, it is the great modulator. Serotonin is produced largely in the Barbafia nuclei of the brainstem, and it projects outward to nearly the entire central nervous system.
So it affects almost everything.
Right. And its primary role in this specific context is downregulating the amygdala.
Which is the threat detection center, right? Like the brain's fire alarm.
Exactly. The amygdala is what sounds the alarm when you feel stressed or anxious. Serotonin dampens that hyperreactivity. It literally raises your threshold for what constitutes a threat.
That is wild.
So the act of focusing on appreciation triggers dopamine, which motivates you to keep looking for good things, while simultaneously triggering serotonin, which chemically silences the chaotic, anxious energy of a stressed nervous system.
Okay, but here's my question. If these chemicals naturally regulate our mood, like if they are already in our brains waiting to make us calm and focused, why do we have to manually hack them with this conscious practice of gratitude?
That's a great question.
I mean, are our brains naturally wired to just ignore the good stuff and default to misery?
What's fascinating here is that, from an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain is not designed to make you happy.
Really?
Not at all. It is designed to keep you alive, full stop. We operate on a built-in survival mechanism known as the negativity bias.
Right, the negativity bias.
Yeah. For our ancestors, noticing the one dangerous predator hiding in the bushes was infinitely more important than noticing a really beautiful sunset.
Because if you miss the sunset, you just miss a pretty view. But if you miss the predator...
You are violently removed from the gene pool. Exactly.
So we are essentially the genetic descendants of the most anxious, hyper-vigilant hominids on the savanna.
We really are. Our default neurological state is to scan our environment for threats, obstacles, and deficits.
Yeah.
That evolutionary hardware kept us alive in a physically dangerous world.
But the problem is we don't live in that world anymore.
Right. In the modern world, the predator is a mildly annoying email, a delayed commute, or a dip in your crypto portfolio.
Which aren't going to kill us.
No, but because our brains don't differentiate between physical life or death threats and psychological stressors, that same hypervigilant system floods us with cortisol over things that just aren't life-threatening.
Wow. Okay, so when we talk about manually hacking the system with gratitude, we are actually talking about intentionally overriding like a million years of evolutionary programming.
Yes. By forcing the brain to look for the positive, we are manually extracting the dopamine and serotonin that our ancient survival instincts want to withhold.
We have this ancient hardware trying to protect us by keeping us in a state of low-grade panic. And we basically have to run a new software program, Gratitude, to signal the hypothalamus that we are actually safe.
That's a perfect way to look at it. And beyond dopamine and serotonin, there's actually a third element here, oxytocin. But this one only comes into play when you express gratitude out loud to another person.
Ah, okay. Oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, right?
Well, yes, it's a neuropeptide produced in the hypothalamus. It is widely known for its role in physical touch and childbirth, sure, but it is deeply involved in pro-social behavior and bonding.
How does gratitude trigger it?
When you look another human being in the eye and express genuine, specific appreciation for them, you stimulate the vagus nerve.
Hmm.
And that triggers a spike in oxytocin for both the giver and the receiver.
Both people get the spike.
Yes, both. And oxytocin actually binds to receptors in the amygdala, further reducing fear and anxiety. But more importantly, it promotes social cohesion. It builds trust.
Because we're a tribal species.
Exactly. We survive better together.
Oh.
Oxytocin is basically the biological glue of that tribal cohesion.
Okay, so the internal chemistry is absolutely fascinating. But, it's easy to hear about dopamine and oxytocin and just dismiss it as a nice theory. If this is truly a biological upgrade, it has to translate to measurable clinical outcomes out in the real world. And this is where the hard data comes in, which I love.
The data is undeniable.
Right. There's this massive meta-analysis published in the Einstein Journal, and they didn't just ask a few people how they felt on a random Tuesday.
No, they looked at rigorous studies.
They pooled results from dozens of clinical trials, specifically looking at severe mental health conditions. And they found that gratitude serves as a therapeutic complement, meaning it's a natural support for treating clinical anxiety and depression while simultaneously increasing positive emotions.
And that term, therapeutic complement, is really critical to understand in a clinical context.
How so?
Well, in psychiatric research, interventions are categorized very carefully. No rigorous scientist is out here suggesting that gratitude is a magical, standalone cure-all that replaces SSRIs or intensive cognitive behavioral therapy for someone with severe major depressive disorder.
Right. We're not saying just be thankful and your clinical depression vanishes.
Exactly. What a therapeutic complement means is that it is a highly effective, scientifically validated parallel treatment.
Okay, a parallel treatment.
Right. When researchers conduct a meta-analysis of dozens of trials, they're looking for statistical significance across diverse populations. They use standard metrics, like measuring things against the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale.
And what did the data actually show?
The data shows that when structured gratitude protocols are added to existing treatments, the clinical shift in the patient's baseline is significantly accelerated.
That's incredible. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We are talking about clinical anxiety and depression conditions that completely alter the trajectory of a person's life.
Yes.
And the data from these trials shows that a tool requiring zero equipment, zero prescription, and zero financial cost carries measurable clinical weight. But how is it actually working in the brains of these patients, like mechanically?
It primarily targets a network in the brain called the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN, what does that do?
The DMN is highly active when we are awake, but not focused on the outside world. So it's active when we're daydreaming, reflecting on the past, or, worrying about the future.
Which is where a lot of us spend our time.
Yeah. And in patients with clinical depression or severe anxiety, the DMN becomes hyperactive and gets locked into a state of rumination.
Meaning they just obsessively loop negative thoughts.
Exactly. They loop past failures, anxieties, worst-case scenarios. Gratitude practices force the brain out of that default mode network and into what's called the task-positive network.
Ah, I see.
You are demanding that the brain focus on a specific, positive, external or internal stimulus. And by repeatedly breaking that rumination loop, you physically weaken those negative neural pathways. That's what provides the clinical relief from the depressive state.
You are actively interrupting the software crash.
That's exactly what it is.
And even if you aren't dealing with severe clinical depression, right? If you just have a high-stress job or you're managing the general everyday chaos of modern life, this data proves you have a tool to build emotional resilience right now.
Yes, exactly.
You don't wait until the house is on fire to buy a fire extinguisher. You can strengthen your nervous system's ability to process stress today using the exact same neurobiological mechanisms that work for clinical populations.
It's the very definition of preventative maintenance for the human nervous system. By regularly engaging those dopaminergic and serotonergic pathways, you are raising your baseline autonomic tone.
So you're just stronger overall.
Right. When a severe stressor inevitably occurs because life happens, your physiological response is buffered. Your amygdala is less reactive, and your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical problem-solving part of your brain, stays online much longer.
That is so powerful. And while the Einstein Journal review proves this helps pull us out of negative states, we also have to look at the other side of the equation.
The positive growth side.
Right. It's not just about mitigating damage. It's about generating a higher baseline of life satisfaction. There were researchers at the University of Pennsylvania who reviewed 44 longitudinal studies on gratitude.
Huge data set.
Huge. And they found that people who regularly express gratitude report higher satisfaction with their lives. But the crucial detail here is causality. The data showed that gratitude today actually predicts future life satisfaction.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the isolation of causality is basically the holy grail in psychological research.
Because correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. It is incredibly easy to observe a correlation and make a false assumption. Like, if you survey 1,000 people and find that the happiest ones are also the most grateful, the intuitive but flawed conclusion is that their happiness is what causes their gratitude.
Right. We assume they are grateful because they have good health or financial stability or great relationships. We view gratitude as the receipt you get after you've already paid for a good life.
Oh, I love that analogy. Yes, exactly like a receipt. But longitudinal studies, like the ones analyzed by UPenn, track populations over extended periods, months, or even years.
So they can see what came first.
Right. They measure baseline life satisfaction to baseline gratitude, then introduce a gratitude intervention to just one group, and track the divergence over time. By doing this, they prove that the act of being grateful is the independent variable.
It's the engine driving it.
It is the engine. The conscious practice of gratitude physically alters the neurological architecture of how you perceive reality, which subsequently creates higher life satisfaction down the road.
Here's where it gets really interesting, Funny. I want you to think about this like water carving a canyon.
Okay, I like this.
Think of your thoughts as the water and your neural pathways as the rock. If you constantly default to anxiety, stress, and threat detection, you are carving a deep, fast-flowing river of negativity. Every time a neutral event happens, your brain naturally routes the water down that deep canyon of stress just because it's the path of least resistance.
That's neurologically very accurate.
But when you start a gratitude practice, you are forcing the water over dry rock. It's difficult at first. It feels really unnatural. But the UPenn study is showing us that if you keep forcing the water that way, you start carving a brand new canyon.
You are describing the fundamental principle of neuroplasticity. It's often summarized by Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Fire together, wire together. I've heard that.
Yeah. When you repeatedly force your brain to identify something positive, you are stimulating what's called long-term potentiation, or LTP.
What happens during LTP?
LTP is the process by which synaptic connections become literally stronger with frequent activation. The brain physically adapts to make that specific pathway more efficient. It increases the number of neurotransmitter receptors and even thickens the myelin sheath around the axon.
Wait, the myelin sheath?
Yeah, the myelin sheath acts like insulation on a wire, and thickening it actually speeds up the electrical signal.
Oh, wow.
So over the course of a year, the gratitude pathway literally becomes the biological path of least resistance. You haven't changed your external circumstances. You still have the same job, the same commute, the same bank account, but you have fundamentally altered the biological apparatus that interprets those circumstances.
Yeah.
That is the causality the UPenn researchers isolated.
Which gives us just an immense amount of agency over our own experience of reality.
Absolutely.
But let's bring this into the environment where we spend the vast majority of our waking hours. Because we don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in the workplace. And if a biological state cannot withstand the pressures of a corporate environment, its utility is pretty limited.
That's the ultimate stress test.
It is. So a review in the Journal of Occupational Health looked specifically at gratitude practices among employees. And they found that it significantly reduced stress and depressive symptoms, particularly when they kept regular gratitude lists.
Well, the modern corporate environment is, biologically speaking, an incredibly unnatural habitat for the human nervous system.
Understatement of the year.
Right. It is a high-stakes arena driven by metrics, deadlines, and constant problem-solving. Employees are literally compensated to identify flaws, anticipate failures, and fix problems.
So their job is to be hypervigilant.
Yes. This occupational requirement inadvertently hyperstimulates the negativity bias we talked about earlier. You are constantly scanning for the next threat, a missed target, an angry client, a restructuring rumor.
And the biological cost of that has to be immense.
It is. The biological cost is what we call allostatic load. It's the wear and tear on the body that accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. In a corporate environment, your HPA axis is constantly dripping cortisol into your system.
Just a slow drip all day long.
Yes, and chronic cortisol exposure impairs memory, suppresses the immune system, and leads directly to burnout. Burnout is not an emotional failing or a weakness. It is the physiological exhaustion of a biologically depleted nervous system.
Wow, that reframes burnout entirely.
It does. And what the Journal of Occupational Health data demonstrates is that introducing gratitude practices acts as a physiological buffer against that allostatic load. It forces the brain to acknowledge what is functioning correctly, which initiates that parasympathetic response and lowers cortisol, allowing employees to actually maintain cognitive endurance.
You know, we usually think of the workplace as the source of our stress, like the place we just need to endure until we can escape to go home and try to find some peace.
Right, the daily grind.
But how radically does it change corporate culture if we weaponize gratitude right in the middle of a stressful environment? Because a team locked in a chronic stress response is going to view every single setback as an existential threat. They get defensive, they point fingers, their vision completely narrows.
And that narrowing of vision is a literal biological phenomenon. During a stress response, the amygdala essentially hijacks the brain.
An amygdala hijack.
Exactly. It pulls resources away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for executive function, creative problem solving, and complex collaboration. The brain is preparing you to fight or flee, not to brainstorm an innovative marketing strategy.
Because your brain thinks the marketing problem is a tiger.
Right. But if a leader cultivates a state of regulated optimism through gratitude, they are maintaining psychological safety. Psychological safety, which is driven by that oxytocin and regulated serotonin we discussed, keeps the prefrontal cortex online.
So they can actually think.
Yes. A neurologically regulated team views a setback as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a threat to their survival. Their cognitive bandwidth is just significantly wider.
It's an operational advantage. You are optimizing the human capital of your team by managing their neurochemistry.
Exactly.
But understanding the mechanics of the HPA axis and neuroplasticity is really only half the battle. If I know exactly how a combustion engine works, but I don't have the keys to the car, it's useless trivia.
True. You need application.
Right. To actually become the ultimate human in this regard, to apply this upgrade, you need a practical, consistent routine. And the sources provide 3 specific, science-backed routines to harness this. Number 1 is gratitude journaling, but there's a very specific mechanic required. You write down 3 things you are grateful for and 1 reason why every single day. The why is what deepens the emotional engagement.
And the why is the linchpin of the entire practice.
Why is the why so important?
Well, if you simply write down 3 things like my dog, my coffee, my spouse, you are utilizing semantic memory.
Yeah.
You're just retrieving factual data, which requires very little cognitive effort and produces almost no neurochemical shift. It just becomes a rote chore, another box to check.
Right, it's just making a grocery list at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the moment you force yourself to articulate the why, for example, I am grateful for my dog because the specific way he leaned against my leg this morning made me feel grounded.
Yeah.
You transition from semantic memory to episodic memory.
Oh. You are forcing the brain to time travel back to that specific moment.
Exactly. Engaging episodic memory requires the hippocampus. You are forcing the brain to reconstruct the scene, to re-experience the sensory and emotional details of that moment.
You're running a simulation.
Yes. And by running that mental simulation, you trick the brain into experiencing the event a second time. The brain's reward centers cannot differentiate between a vividly recalled memory and a present experience.
That is wild.
It is. Therefore, articulating the why guarantees the maximum possible release of dopamine and serotonin. The why is the mechanism that ensures you are actually entering the biological state, rather than just performing the social pleasantry on paper.
So don't skip the why.
Never skip the why.
Okay, routine number 2 is expressing it out loud. Telling someone they made an impact. We touched on this earlier with the vagus nerve and oxytocin, but this moves the practice from the solitary to the relational.
It does. Writing in your journal regulates your own internal autonomic nervous system. But looking someone in the eye and vocalizing genuine, specific appreciation regulates both of your systems simultaneously.
A shared biological upgrade.
Exactly. The act of vocalizing and receiving positive social feedback triggers a potent neurochemical cocktail. It builds a neurological bridge. In an era categorized by an epidemic of loneliness and social fragmentation, intentionally spiking oxytocin through vocalized appreciation is a profound, actionable tool. It's how you engineer a micro-community of high trust around yourself.
Okay, that brings us to routine number 3, which takes this straight into the corporate world. Starting meetings with one acknowledgement of what's working well or who helped out that week. Now, I know there's someone listening to this right now thinking, starting a Q3 earnings meeting with a gratitude circle sounds incredibly soft. We have supply chain disruptions and revenue targets to hit. We don't have time for kumbaya.
I hear that pushback all the time.
Right. But based on the data on allostatic load and amygdala hijacks, this isn't soft at all. This is actually a ruthless high-performance productivity hack, isn't it?
It is incredibly pragmatic.
Yeah.
Just consider the neurochemical state of a standard corporate meeting. Participants usually enter the room in a state of sympathetic arousal.
Very stressed.
Right. They are defensive, bracing for criticism or problems. Their prefrontal cortex is partially inhibited. By taking just 90 seconds at the onset of the meeting to publicly acknowledge a win or express gratitude for a specific effort, you are systematically altering the neurochemical environment of the entire room.
You're shifting the collective biology.
You are downregulating the collective HPA axis. You are spiking oxytocin, which drastically increases the group's willingness to share ideas without fear of social penalty. You are quite literally priming the biological hardware of your team to perform at a higher cognitive level for the remainder of the hour. It is a strategic optimization of the environment.
That completely flips the script on how to run a meeting. So you have 3 specific levers you can pull. Journal the why to engage episodic memory and maximize dopamine. Speak it out loud to stimulate the vagus nerve and build oxytocin. And force the issue at work to hack the cognitive bandwidth of your team.
And the absolute key here is consistency.
Consistency, right. These routines aren't quick fixes.
No, you don't just do this for a weekend. The neuroplasticity we discussed, carving that new canyon in the rock, only happens through sheer repetition.
Which brings us to the 7-day challenge. The instruction is simple, but honestly, brutal for the modern human. For 7 days, start your morning with gratitude before you reach for your phone. One line, one thought, one reason.
And this raises an important question. Why is the smartphone the enemy of this biological state?
Yeah, why is the phone so bad first thing in the morning?
To understand this, we have to look at the neurobiology of waking up. When you transition from sleep to wakefulness, you are in what's called a hypnopompic state. Your brain waves are shifting from delta and theta into alpha and eventually beta. You are highly neuroplastic and highly suggestible in that window.
Okay, so your brain is like spongy.
Very spongy. Furthermore, you experience the cortisol awakening response, or CAR. It's a natural spike in cortisol designed just to give you the energy to get out of bed.
Your body's already giving you a dose of stress hormone just to wake you up.
Yes. And what happens the exact second you grab your phone and open a news app, your email, or social media?
You see a dozen problems.
Exactly. You're immediately bombarded with external stimuli, demands on your attention, and potential threats. This triggers the locus coeruleus in the brainstem to dump noradrenaline into your system. You thrust your brain violently into a reactive, high-stress state before your feet have even touched the floor.
Oh, man.
You amplify that cortisol awakening response way beyond its natural level. By reaching for the phone first, you are surrendering the biological high ground of your entire day.
You are literally letting an algorithm decide your autonomic tone.
Precisely. The challenge to find one thought of gratitude and the reason why before touching the phone is a radical act of claiming your own biology. It leverages that highly plastic hypnopompic state to carve the canyon of regulated optimism.
You're carving the canyon while the rock is softest.
Exactly. It ensures that the very first intentional neurochemicals released into your system are dopamine and serotonin, which sets a parasympathetic tone that buffers you against the stressors you will inevitably encounter once you do check that phone. You are choosing the operating system for your day before the world has a chance to install its own.
I challenge you to take on this specific 7-day task. Treat it like a clinical trial on yourself. You have the mechanics now. You understand the HPA axis, the mesolimbic pathway, and the data on neuroplasticity.
You know it's not just a polite social construct.
Right. So test it. For the next 7 mornings, wake up, leave the phone on the nightstand, and find one line, one thought, and one reason why. See if you can actually feel that biological shift yourself. Because, as the source says, when you train the brain to find the good, your biology has no choice but to follow.
We have spent this entire discussion deconstructing a concept that the modern world largely dismisses as trivial.
Yeah, just say thank you.
Right. But we've moved gratitude from an awkward Thanksgiving tradition to a daily biological imperative. We've seen how it regulates the autonomic nervous system, how it acts as a complementary intervention for severe clinical depression, how it isolates causality to predict future life satisfaction, and how it mitigates allostatic load in the workplace.
We really have journeyed from the dinner table to the absolute cutting edge of neurobiology, and it all boils down to that one simple, repetitive act of focusing on the good and demanding a why.
I want to leave you with a final concept to mull over.
Yeah.
We have focused intensely on the individual today, how this rewires your specific neural pathways, how it affects your specific workplace. But if we scale this up, the implications are just staggering.
How so?
Well, if a simple daily act of finding one reason why we are grateful can literally rewire an individual's nervous system to see opportunities instead of obstacles, what would happen to our society's biggest, most unsolvable challenges if an entire culture adopted this biological upgrade? If a critical mass of the population shifted their neurological baseline from reactive threat detection to regulated optimism, how would our public discourse change? How would our communities function? If gratitude turns into growth, how big could that societal growth actually be?
That is an incredible thought to end on. So what does this all mean? It means you have an incredibly potent tool at your disposal, literally waiting inside your own neuroanatomy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning the mechanics behind the things you thought were just cliches, and whatever you do not touch that phone tomorrow morning until you've found your one reason. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.